These flip notes are going to cover the transition from the nomads of the Paleolithic era and the early settlements of the Neolithic era into creating civilizations, and as we create civilizations, what kinds of things begin to emerge throughout history. As always with flip notes, make sure that you are following along and jotting down the information, and see me, email me, send me a message if you have any questions. So the very first permanent settlements appear along the river valleys because they must live near a water source. If you're going to have agriculture and if you're going to survive, you have to have a water source. So they choose the river valleys that are wide enough to create settlements and do have farmland, but also are fairly protected generally. They emerge in the Fertile Crescent initially. The very first ones are going to be in Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, and then also in Egypt. The river valleys are going to provide nutrient-dense soil. As the rivers flood, they deposit silt and give nutrient-dense soil for the crops to grow. They also generally are protected from other enemy civilizations, as river valleys tend to be narrower and allow mountain protection. Depending on where you are, those mountains may be larger than others. We're going to call river valleys cradles of civilization because the civilizations are all going to emerge independently within those river valleys, and it's going to alter. Different groups are going to have different social, political, and economic developments because of being isolated. So the first thing we're going to talk about is social patterns. We talk here about social class systems, including the fact that every civilization, we'll talk about this multiple times in class, are going to have social structures that include from the wealthy to the poor. Almost every civilization we will cover will discuss slavery as well, including the concept that slavery was not a race-based system. Slaves emerge through lots of different concepts, including you could actually go into slavery in some cultures because you owed enough money, but generally by being captured as enemy soldiers or the enemy civilians as you're invading an area. Rulers are almost always going to be kings, though they may name them differently. Like, for instance, pharaohs, right, are Egyptian kings. The pharaohs, they believe, were god kings, gods on earth. That's not going to be very different from most of the other civilizations they're going to develop. Almost all of them had hereditary paternal family lines of kings, which means that it's your father-son relationship that maintains power. The world's first states are going to emerge in this time frame. Now, the word state, as we use it in history, is the same term that we use in the United States for country. A state is an independent political unit. It means that they are one independent government system. You're going to have different terms for that, including city-states, kingdoms, and empires, which we'll talk about later. They're always going to have centralized governments because you have to have a central government in order to maintain power. They almost always as well maintain the concept, like with the pharaohs, with the god kings, that the ruling family line is in power because the gods or God put them in that position. That concept of God choosing the rulers is actually still used in history all the way up through the 16 and 1700s. The kings of France and England that are involved in the wars that you learn about in U.S. history class, the French and Indian War, the American Revolution, are claiming divine right. They claim that their family had power from God. It's not widely accepted that that's false until around the 1800s. You're also going to emerge with the first written law codes. Now, of course, every civilization had laws. Societies develop laws as a way to maintain control and maintain a sense of morality, but it's not initially that they get written down. One, because not everybody had a written system in general. We're going to talk about the development of writing and the transition from prehistory to history, but also you start writing down codes like the Ten Commandments for the Hebrews, but also legal codes like the Code of Hammurabi, which we'll study in this unit, because you have to have a system where the government says this is what you can and cannot do. You can't hold people accountable. It's much more difficult to hold people accountable if they don't have any semblance of idea of the laws. Economics. So sorry, I think the bell caught us there. So with economic patterns, obviously you're going to deal with trading, with money, and with people beginning to, with the specialization of workers, you have people who are potters, or people who are weavers, or people who are farmers, or people who are government workers, and they are going to need to trade with each other. We're also going to move from the Stone Age into the Metal Ages, the Bronze Age first, and then the Iron Age, where they are building with tools out of metals rather than out of stone. Obviously, they are going to develop different skills: bronze metallurgy, bronze working, iron working, but that more importantly, that you can make more specialized tools when you have the ability to adapt the metal rather than the rocks, which are where you're pretty stuck with arrowhead type shapes anyway. With the advent of better tools with plows, and with the introduction of irrigation systems, including largely digging channels from the river into the fields, essentially ditches, that as the water flows, it would flow up and could irrigate the crops. You're going to have, for the first times in history, agricultural surplus, or extra food sources. And since you have more food now being produced than can be consumed, you don't need as many people in the fields working, and then you can then lead to more innovation, because rather than devoting quite so many people to feeding your population, you now can have people who are going to become the metal workers, the blacksmiths, or they can become soldiers, or they can become government officials, or they can become artisans. And therefore your economy is going to steadily grow, as well as your culture. We're going to begin trading between these civilizations. We talk specifically about the Phoenicians in this instance, because the Phoenicians' homeland was the Middle East. The Phoenician homeland was near Israel, and the Phoenicians became very skilled at sailing. They created large seaworthy vessels, and then they actually created colonies all around the Mediterranean Sea, along the northern coast of Africa and the southern coast of Europe, where they created these colonies in which they could trade, which also allowed them to have access to different resources to further develop their economy. The world's first cities are going to emerge. If you picture here places in Egypt where you would have pharaohs and that sort of thing. We talked a little bit in our artifacts activity about the ancient city of Ur, that Chinese are going to have cities. As you have more and more people moving into an area, you're going to develop an urban system. And again, we've already talked about this, but remember that slavery is going to take various forms throughout the entire ancient world. So the religious systems are also going to develop almost exclusively in this unit. Everyone is going to practice polytheism, or a version of religion where you're going to believe that gods take many forms, that there are multiple kinds of gods. Probably the one you're most familiar with is the system that the Greeks used with Zeus and Aphrodite and Hades and those sort of people, but almost all the cultures early on are going to have similar systems, generally based in the animal and the natural world. The Jewish people, the Hebrews, are going to be the first with Abraham to develop monotheism, or the belief in only one true God, and that monotheism practice is going to extend to Christianity, to Islam, to Zoroastrianism of the Persians. We have also emerged into, not in prehistory anymore, but into history itself, because we've created the first written systems. Pictograms are when you use pictures to symbolize words. And actually hieroglyphics is a great example of the pictogram system, where they had pictures that represented sounds or represented words, and they can now be translated. Cuneiform is actually what I have drawn here. They're like triangles and dots and wedge shapes that were pressed into clay, and then those clay tablets were hardened, and then that's how they would preserve their writing system. Of course, if you drop the tablet, then you have completely destroyed your written system. Kind of like if you drop your iPad and it shatters, only like we've only lost the tablet, we keep the data, they actually lose the data that's been recorded. The Phoenicians are the first to come up with something called the alphabet, and there's a reason that phonics is a word that we use. Phonics obviously derives from the term Phoenicians, and the way the alphabet works, you've probably never thought about it before, but we have a symbol that represents each sound in our language. So remember when you were little and you learned that the A shape sounds like A or A. The B shape goes buh, buh, buh. That's a phonetic system where you combine multiple symbols to make words because they only represent a sound, not an idea. And the Phoenicians are the first to do that. Oh, so that looks like it. There are some questions on the side that I want you to go ahead and pull up and look at. Try and answer those to the best of your ability. Also, if you get a second, you're going to want to search what hieroglyphics, cuneiform, and the Phoenician alphabet looks like. There are pictures of it, I believe, on the side of your packet. If you have any questions, as always, let me know.